Welcome to Authored by Us, a podcast celebrating children's books about characters of color or of different cultural experiences, and the authors who bring these diverse works to life. Each week, we invite you to join us as we turn the pages of these bookshelf gems and hear from their creators who understand that stories of diverse experience truly come to life when authored by us. Here's your host, Zenzi Hodge.
Greetings and welcome back, listeners. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Authored by Us. You know, when I was a kid, I was a big fan of comics and cartoons. I read Archie comics and I used to race home from school to watch the Transformers and He-Man. Those were my favorites. And even while I was in college, I used to watch cartoons as well, but that's sort of another story. But when I became a parent, I was happy that I had a son who was a fan of comics. And he likes to call them graphic novels. So I still call them comics. Graphic novels are his thing. But we have constant discussions about Marvel versus DC. And for many young boys, particularly Black boys, seeing Black Panther on the comic pages and then on the movie screen was a dream come true. So while we spend our time talking with authors about their books and the need to include representation in their books, it only makes sense that our children see themselves in comics and these graphic novels. And so because every kid wants to be a superhero, it's important that we give them the opportunity to see that in the pages. So for today's episode, we're talking with author Allan Jackson about his book, about a superhero, about a Black kid superhero. And his book is titled The Supadupa Kid. Is an award-winning children's author. He's a literacy advocate and a captivating motivational speaker. He is also the co-founder of the Read or Else movement and Danny Dollar Academy. In 2011, he founded Big Heads LLC, a literacy organization that aims to introduce children to the joys of reading. Travels around the country inspiring children and educating adults about the impacts of illiteracy. I'm so happy to welcome Allan Jackson to Authored by Us. Welcome to the show, Ty.
Thank you so much. I'm like super duper excited to be here, and I'll try not to interject that word at every sentence.
Well, if you don't, I will, because I found it throughout the book and I have it placed in a couple of places. So I'm excited because everything should be super duper. That's what I
love
think.
It. That's my new mantra. I'm taking that. Everything should be super duper.
I think so. We could tweet that hashtag everything should be super duper.
Done. That's for real.
So, tell us about your book, The Supadupa Kid.
The Supadupa Kid really originated in my head when I was maybe about 6-7 years old, when I was introduced to the concept of comic books and just had the greatest and most immediate infatuation with them. It's my first love when it comes to reading, and it's still my current love. I still read superheroes today. In fact, I have action figures and superhero posters all in my office. I am the biggest kid that I know. So what really mattered to me as a kid was loving superheroes was representation. And so Spider-Man actually was the superhero that I connected with the most. And not because he was a person of color, he wasn't. But the one distinctive thing that Spider-Man had in common from other superheroes is that he was a kid. He was a little kid. All the other superheroes, Batman, Iron Man, Thor, Wonder Woman, they're all adults. But Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is a student from Queens. Well, I'm a student from the Bronx. So that connection really made it stuck with me. Not to mention, I've always kind of had a love for spiders too. But seeing a young kid who was awkward in school, awkward around girls, a geek, and really into science, well, that was me. So that representation really aligned and connected with me and really started my fascination with superheroes. And then once I became an author and I wrote my very first book titled Danny Dollar, which deals with a completely another topic on financial literacy, the next book that I wrote, that I wanted to write, was a superhero book, and I really couldn't get the idea for one until I walked down the aisle of a Home Depot. and I was actually looking for glue. And I was looking for glue. And as I looked for glue, I see you gasp. So I see you already made the connection. I actually saw a tube, and the name of the tube was Super Duper Glue. And I said, wow, what an interesting name that would be for a superhero. And as you can tell, since you read the book, the glue plays an integral part to the story. And that's really where the origin of the Super Duper Kid comes from.
Wow. Wow. So since you mentioned Peter Parker, and yes, he was a kid, but he was also a science kid. He was a kid who enjoyed the sciences. And that's something I found in your book, whether you intended to put it there, it was just sneakily placed and I loved it. You taught science and history in the Super Duper Kid. So, and just to mention one of your characters, Ronald, he was a little brain. And everything he did was science-based. So he figured out about the glue, and he was like teaching a physical science class through every aspect of the book. And I'm like, wow, this is science. And then there was also history that was thrown in there because you covered Wilbur Wright and Thomas Edison, but you also gave your schools the names of Rosa Parks and Booker T. Washington. And so I read it, and as a parent, I'm thinking, wow, this is entertaining, but this is also educational.
Yeah, what was important for me was like to kind of put vegetables in the mashed potatoes. You know what I mean? Like that was the literary version of putting vegetables in the mashed potatoes. So that kids were reading, but subliminally, they're getting the names of Rosa Parks. They're getting the names of Thomas Edison. And, I'm sure a lot of them's like, who's Thomas Edison? And so maybe it allows them to kind of, go creatively and touch on that. And I didn't want to emphasize too much on it and make it too heavy, because ultimately I believe that reading primarily for children needs to be fun. It needs to be something like, I know very often as parents, we want to give them the vegetables. Kids want the mashed potatoes. So like, if we can stick the vegetables in the mashed potatoes, then we're satisfying both worlds.
Absolutely. So I end up talking about my son a lot. And, one of these days he's probably going to listen to these and be like, wow, she kept mentioning me, but I do, because I get a lot of inspiration from him. And, one of the things that I realized with him, and I share this with other parents as well, is that to get your child to read, you got to let them read the things that they enjoy. And he enjoys graphic novels. He started at a new school several years ago, and he was there during the summer, and he was reading a comic, and he did not get to complete the comic during the camp. But when he started school 2 months later, the first time he had an opportunity to take the book out of the library, he went straight for that comic because he wanted to continue it. And so I think that it's really important that parents allow their children to find the genre that impacts them. And for a lot of kids, seeing the Super Duper Kid, that it presents itself as a comic, that's something that draws them in. And so as I looked at the cover, the first thing I said was, oh, this is a graphic novel. I'm like, I was expecting to turn the pages and find illustrations. And then I open it up and I'm like, wait a second, this is a chapter book. And it gets them with the cover and it pulls them in, but it also encourages them to read and imagine. And so I wanted to ask you, why did you choose that combination novel and graphic novel? And why did you also choose to lean more towards having written words versus illustrations in this book?
Well, there's two practical reasons. One, the power and the importance of words really matters to me. And, while I know our kids are visual, we're all visual creatures, but the true expansion of our mind and enhancing our imagination comes with reading, not with seeing. So I knew the more that I made this text-based as opposed to visually based, I knew that I was going to stimulate kids more. But another big honest reason is because I'm an independent author. And having more illustrations costs me more money. So to cut back on the cost of the book, I kept my illustrations minimal, so it had kind of a dual purpose of encouraging kids to read more of a story-based story, but also so that I wouldn't have to spend a small fortune on having 300 illustrations throughout the whole book.
So I'm guessing that you're not also an illustrator, sort of like me. Stick figures in a book don't necessarily go over so well. But text we can give you lots of.
And I can't make a good stick figure, so having an illustrator for me is paramount. So yes, you and I are in the same thing. I'm not an artist in any capacity.
You mentioned about being able to reach children with the language, and by giving more text, it allowed them to tap into their creativity and envision what they were reading. And that's so true, because I read the book and I found myself thinking that this is very relatable language. It was real language, things that you can actually hear. You described Hoodie, one of the characters, as being twice Javvon's size with half the brain. And I read that and I busted out laughing, but I could actually see that. I had an image in my head, or the little girl referring to him as the Supadupa Kid because she couldn't say Supadupa Kid. And I have to go out and say to someone that, such and such has gone pecans, because you read it, you were like, oh, that means they went nuts. I'm like, oh.
That's great.
But you had you used some language that was relatable for the child reading. It was entertaining, but it also allowed them to be extremely creative, being able to see and envision what was going on. How did you find the words to tell this story?
So when I write visually. I may not have a lot of visualizations or a lot of illustrations, but I learned to write, or let me rephrase, I learned to tell stories by watching movies. I'm a huge movie fan. So when I write, I'm trying to visually construct a story so that while the child is reading the book, they can actually see the image in their head. So they can see that this kid, they can see what Javvon looks like. And then when they envision somebody twice the size, there's this hulking figure that they may perceive to have because of that. Or a little girl, like you said, who can't, really articulate and say the Supadupa Kid. We can all relate to that little kid that, can't quite say the words quite right. Yeah. So it's really important for me to paint a picture, through my text and through my verbiage that kids can see in their head. I'm a big Stephen King fan, and Stephen King is infamous for that. Like, he will spend 3 pages talking about a blade of grass. He will really visualize, but within that story, you can feel the color of the grass and the dew on the blades of the grass. Like, he really paints an incredibly vivid picture. And that's kind of what I wanted to do when I was telling my story. I really think that's part of what gravitates kids to the book. It's not just action and fun and adventure. It actually gives them a vivid picture inside their head as they're reading along.
That it absolutely does. And one of the other things that I found, just in terms of how you developed your characters, they were like real people. Javvon's sister, Denise, I think she reminded me of my sister. I think she reminded us of everybody's sister. I'm going to tell. And, you were like, gosh, she's really annoying. But you gave her such life. Were your characters based on any inspirations from your real life?
My real life, no. They were actually based, because I didn't have a little sister growing up. I had a little brother, but he was really kind of not to say distant, but we didn't have a true bond to have like those type of really intimate sibling rivalries that you would have. Instead, I derived a lot of my characters from television. But the relationship between Javvon and Dee and Denise is actually the same relationship between Dee and Roger from What's Happening. That's exact, and you can tell because in the beginning of the book she says, "Ooh, I'm telling Mama," and so that is literally paying homage to Dee from What's Happening, who's like, to me, the most iconic little sister in television history. And that's the relationship that I wanted to build. In fact, my other book, Danny Dollar, also has a sibling rivalry, and I based the sibling between Alex P. Keaton and Mallory Keaton from Family Ties. So, like, And Dan Dollar is like this financial literacy savant, just like Alex.
That's right.
And Danielle, the sister, is the whimsical spending money on everything, clothes and makeup, just like Mallory from Family Ties. So no, I didn't derive them from personal experience. I derived them from my celluloid television experience.
And so, well, I know I dated myself when I started getting excited about that, but I so remember Family Ties and What's Happening. And yes, Denise is definitely D. So you nail that.
Awesome. I love that you got it. When I tell people that for the first time, and I can literally see the light bulb go off upon your head. You got it. Wow, that's exactly who that character is.
So now I'm going to have to read this over again. And so usually when I read, I give voices to things. So I'm going to have to read and hear her voice, because
Absolutely.
I read through this book and I had a whole vision in my head, and you're letting the characters talk. So I'm going back through, and I need to hear Raj, I need to hear Dee, and yes, I think that's where we definitely need to go. As I read through again, every chapter built a lot of anticipation. And so, yeah, I grew up watching cartoons where they would say, tune in next week so you can find out what was happening next. So I'm flipping through the pages, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the chapter just ended. Oh my gosh, the next chapter. And so I really got excited about getting to the next chapter and keep reading and keep reading. I think sometimes kids get so accustomed to things being neatly packaged for them, and it's all instant, that they really don't have the opportunity to build anticipation. And I think you required readers to make an investment and keep reading with each page and with each page. And it just drew you in.
Yeah, it was important for me, again, having this movie construct. Like when you look at the Avengers, and they kind of break up the scenes and then kind of tie them together, but like the end of every scene is kind of like a little cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll go to the relationship between Captain America and Black Panther, and then they'll segue back to Thanos, but then they come back, and so at the end of every little scene, you're wondering, oh my gosh, what Captain America and Black Panther going to do? Like, I can't wait till after the Thanos scene so I could see. And then it just kind of evolves from there. And so it was really important for me after every chapter to almost have like a mini cliffhanger, like to just kind of leave you hanging just enough that you would want to you wouldn't want to put the book down, because you got to know what's going to happen next. And so it's a writing style that I had to develop organically and purposefully, because I really didn't grow up to aspire being a writer. So I had to find a really creative way to like engage the reader. So I thought the more that I can make this like a movie where there's just these little cliffhangers at the end of every chapter, the more that I think kids would be engaged.
Well, you certainly did that. And, as you talk about movies, I can see Javvon and his orange suit either on the screen in a theater or in your home theater. So I just want to know, what's next for the Supadupa Kid?
Well, the sequel for the Supadupa Kid just came out during the summer months back in last June. So I'm incredibly excited about that. It's getting wonderful reviews. And what I'm proud to say and this is something I really do a better job of promoting, the Supadupa Kid Part 1 is actually being adapted into a musical. Here where I live in Western Massachusetts, it actually was supposed to debut last summer, but then of course COVID happened. Mm-hmm. It probably won't debut this summer either, but it will certainly, hopefully next year, debut as an actual theatrical production with, a tremendous set. The production company that's taking care of it has literally got like the best of the best to come in and do this production. But to kind of tease that, they took my sequel, The Supadupa Kid Part 2, entitled Move, and they adapted it into a virtual read aloud. So you can go to YouTube and you can actually have the entire book read to you by young people, young actors who are hired to play Javvon and Ronald and all the new characters that come along this book. So if you YouTube The Supadupa Kid Part 2, you will actually be able to see a read aloud by these amazing young actors.
Not to worry, listeners, we'll place the link directly to the YouTube channel for the Supadupa Kid in our podcast notes. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back in a Supadupa minute.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. Authored by Us is made possible by listeners like you. We thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
Well, we're back with author Ty Allan Jackson, and he's talking with us about his book, The Supadupa Kid. Now, Ty, when you and I first spoke, I had shared with you how I feel about the importance of Black male authors because I'm the mother of a son. So allowing him to read books by authors who look like him, there's something special there. And there's something that I noticed in The Supadupa Kid that I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but it's definitely something that I picked up. There were so many male characters, and they were significant male characters. So, of course, you had your hero, Javvon, and his friend Roddle, but there was also Hoodie, and these were the children. But Erica and Javvon both came from two-parent households. And I think it's important when children read books and they see that Black families have two parents in that household. But there were also significant males in Javvon's community and his school experience. So his teacher was a male, the principal was a male. And I'm not sure if you shared the gender of police officer Taylor, but I just assumed that it was a male police officer. So was this something you planned, or was it just something that happened?
The other characters were kind of happenstance, but the dynamic of having a two-family household was completely purposeful. It really was very meaningful to me that especially young Black kids see the dynamic of family. And of course, family is all determined and relative on what is, relevant in your life. But, the stereotype of single parent households and things like that are prominent, those stereotypes that are prominent in the Black and African American community are things that I wanted to dismantle. I unfortunately grew up in a single parent household with just a mom who is still to this day my superhero. But I'm the father of three amazing, beautiful children that I lived with for their entire child life. And that dynamic of sitting down and having family dinner with my kids and teaching my son how to throw a football and taking my daughters to ballet recital, it was incredibly important to me, and incredibly important for me to resonate with the reader. So yes, that was purposeful. I did also, as a kid growing up, have more so in high school and in middle school, not so much in elementary, a lot of strong male educational role models. So when you see the principal and the teacher and even the police officers that are male, and yes, Officer Taylor is a male, that's because there were a lot of prominent male in my life, especially in my educational system. And I know that I believe it's 67% of all teachers across the country are white female.
Yep.
So to be able to have strong dominating male role models in the book, yes, was really purposeful.
And
we pick it up. You're really good.
We thank you for that. These are things that growing up as a kid, you're a girl, so you look for girls. You look for that mirror of you. And it's important for all of our children to see themselves in a book. And so I thank you for making sure that you did that.
Yeah, thank you. But I want to say that on the flip side, my new book, The Supadupa Kid Part 2, has a tremendous amount of girl power. That the Supadupa Kid gets a sidekick who's a female. Mm-hmm. The villains are actually triplet females, which is awesome. And I actually dubbed them the Treacherous Three. And if you're a hip hop fan, then you know all about the Treacherous Three. So and then sprinkled throughout the book are other female characters. So I definitely wanted to have a balance. And I got that a lot, especially as I was touring and I was speaking to kids about the Supadupa Kid. Mm-hmm. And a lot of Latinas had come up to me and said, we're not really represented very well, and you should do something about that. So I did. And so his sidekick is a young girl by the name of Maya, but her superhero name is Muévate. And Muévate is the Spanish word for move. And she has the power of telekinesis to move things with her mind. So it's really pretty awesome. Look how excited you are. That's awesome.
Well, I'm just going to tell you that I always tell my son that if I had a superpower, it would be telekinesis. That's all.
That's awesome.
And the fact that I've actually thought about this, that should kind of let you know where we are.
I love it.
It's okay.
I love it. Love it.
And I like that you listen to your fans. You talk with kids, you hear how they feel about the book, and you're able to impart that into another edition, or impart some of that into your characters. Something else I noticed that that was a theme, even though you were talking about a superhero. Because if you think about Captain America was a hero because he had some bullies that he had to deal with in his life. And so this wasn't just a book about a kid superhero. It sort of started with a kid that was facing a bully. And that's real for a lot of children. So why did you include this message in your book? And how do you see the Supadupa Kid as a tool to help kids deal with the hoodies, the bullies, and adversities that they may face in life?
Well, I love that you picked that up. I was bullied as a kid, as many of us are. In fact, I like to think that hoodie actually, not to think, hoodie is actually, derived from a bully named Noble. Of all names, the bully's name was Noble in middle school. And so overcoming my fear of the bully and finding the courage to stand up to the bully was really important to me as a kid. It gave me a level of self-confidence and self-worth, and made me realize that there was a toughness inside of me that I didn't know that I had. And dealing also with the bully in a positive manner, and not just attempting to fight, but like really having conversations with the bully and confronting the bully in a more constructive way. Kind of led me to wanting to create this character who, really knowing that he was bullied, didn't fear the bully. And to be able to deal with the bully in a much more constructive way. I thought that was really, really important. And many kids, unfortunately, are bullied on a consistent basis, and sometimes find it difficult to be able to voice to their parents or their teachers or guardians that this is happening to them, because it's embarrassing and it can be hurtful. And I wanted Javvon to really, have the courage to be able to showcase the kids that, yes, you can stand up and you can confront your bully in a constructive way, and hopefully be able to be victorious in being able to deal with that. It's a scary thing that unfortunately many children are going to, but I thought it would be great to kind of have a role model for them to look up to know how to deal with it.
I absolutely love that. Now, you've talked with us about the Supadupa Kid. You've teased about the Supadupa Kid 2. And I know that, you have other books, but our listeners don't. So tell us about your other written work.
So Danny Dollar is my very first book. It's my flagship book. I got the book, the idea to write the book because when my son was 8 years old, he asked if he could open up a lemonade stand. He made $50 in 3 hours selling lemonade, which blew my mind. He said, "Dad, what am I going to do with all this money?" And I really didn't know. So my mother always taught me, when I don't know the answer to a question, I can always find that answer in a book. So I went to my local bookstore to find a book to teach my son about finance and entrepreneurship. And I noticed two things. One, there are almost no books teaching kids about money. And two, there were so few contemporary Black characters that looked like my son. And that's where I got the idea. The name Danny Dollar just popped in my head. I went home and started typing. It took me a year to write the story. I submitted my book to 147 agents. I was rejected 147 times. And I learned to publish it myself. I started my own publishing company. And to date, I've sold 65,000 copies of that book.
That's amazing.
It's been turned into a theatrical play. It's been a serial story in 20 newspapers across the country. And it's also the foundation of Danny Dollar Academy, which is a financial literacy program that is now collaboration with the Federal Reserve. And we've, up to this point, empowered over 5,000 students, mostly from urban communities, about the power of finance and entrepreneurship. So there's that. Go ahead.
No, well, I think you stopped just shy of sharing something else with us, that through reading Danny Dollar, you inspired another kid who was a reader to start a program for young bros to get them to read as well.
I love that you segued to that. So, Super Keys was a young boy from St. Louis, Missouri, who walked into a bookstore one day. He saw a copy of Danny Dollar and just sat there on the floor where his mother and started reading the book. Well, his mother, seeing how jovial he was, started doing a Facebook Live on him and having such excitement from reading this book and seeing a character again that looks like him. Well, this goes viral with like 100,000 views in just a couple of days. And I discover it. And so I reach out to the mother. I say, hey, my name is Ty, and I'm the author of the book. And she's like, he won't stop reading it. He won't stop talking about it. And he wants to start a book club because he wants other kids to feel the same way that he felt reading this book. So I said, well, I will happily donate a copy of the book to all the kids. So about 10 kids join the club. I donate the books and I video chat with them afterwards. And then I offer the Supadupa Kid to them as the next book. And they love that. And I video chat with them. Well, this little boy starts to blow up. First with the local news discovering, that he started this book club, which, by the way, was originally only for little black boys reading by black characters. And then it got the attention from the local news to NBC Nightly News. Well, that got the attention of the Steve Harvey Show. Well, that got the attention of CNN, and he became a CNN hero. Well, that got the attention of Disney, and Disney did a segment on him from a segment called the Marvel Heroes Project, which they found 20 young people around the country who are changing the world almost like a superhero would. And they featured him, and in turn, reached out to me, flew me out to St. Louis, where I got to meet him for the first time. So for your listeners, if you have Disney Plus, you can go to the Marvel Heroes Project, episode number 10. You'll get to see Sidney Key's amazing story, and you will also get to see me.
Wow. And he has a new bro for his subscription club, and it's my son.
That's absolutely that makes my heart sing. That's wonderful. I love that.
One of our authors several episodes ago talked about the fact that when it's the holidays or a birthday or any special occasion, she gifts books. And that's what we do. You love to read, you give books to other children so that they can enjoy that love of reading. And I believe that Books and Bros is a great way to get books into the hands of children all the time. And so anything that encourages children to read is always something very, very special to me. So, and look how you inspired him from that one book. Well, your son with a lemonade stand asking you, what do I do with this money? And how that turned into something that has now inspired another generation of readers.
It's incredibly gratifying. It really helped me discover my purpose. I didn't know I had this gift inside of me to write these stories. So I tell people all the time that the universe or God or however you define it is speaking to us all the time and giving us signs and signals on what our purpose is. It's our job to listen. Because if I decided to my son and say, you know what, son, I don't feel like a lemonade stand today, then these books don't exist. I'm not talking to you. And, none of this happens. So it's really essential for us to be adventurous with our children, to heed and honor the things that it is they bring to our attention. They're very often our most gifted and prolific teachers. And I'm grateful that I listen to my son because, my life has completely changed. Because of that, I found my purpose of why I'm here. This is what I do for a living, is write books. This isn't my side hustle. This is how I live. And I couldn't be more grateful. I'll do this with my last breath. It's the most gratifying thing. And for the benefit of my son also, because he claims that because his question spawned this new life of mine, he wants 10% of everything I make.
Of course they do. And he probably has an agent. Look out for a call.
For real. Thanks, sir.
So you love to read. You grew up reading. I grew up reading, but we realized that that's not always the standard for a lot of kids. And I remember while I was in college, I attended Florida A&M University. Yes, I have to plug my alma mater, but So I had a professor in college one year, and he looked around the class and he said, how many books do you all have? And then he sort of looked at the girls. He said, well, how many shoes do you have? And he
Mm,
stated that you should always have more books, not the texts for class, but you should have more books for recreational reading than you have shoes in your closet. And so I went home that evening, went in my closet, and I started counting because I knew I had a significant amount of shoes. But I was so happy that I met his standard, that I exceeded it because I had more books than I did have shoes. But that wasn't the case for everyone else. So, how do we ignite a love of reading? A love of reading, particularly in children, so that the next generation, that whether it's more books than shoes, more books than games, or more books than whatever, but that they have a bookshelf full of books. How do we ignite that next generation of readers?
well, James Baldwin once said, and I have to paraphrase, is that children never listen to their parents, but they also never fail to emulate them. If we're going to inspire our children to read, we cannot be hypocritical. We have to read as well. Our children are byproducts of us, and what it is that we do, they will mimic. And so it's essential for parents to be readers and do so by reading with your children, reading to your children. Another thing that I think that parents need to do a much better job of is simply visit a bookstore. Bookstores are the most, if you ask a kid, when was the last time they've been to a bookstore, many of them, or even a library, would tell you that they can't remember, if ever. Bookstores are just the most magical places when you walk in and there's that smell of brand new books. And like you said earlier in this interview, giving kids the opportunity to let them decide for themselves. This is where you step back as the parent and you let the child run free and let them decide what it is. Let them take ownership of the book that they decide is going to move them. And so I think that's important. And then there's also other things like little hacks that I do or did with my kids when they were little, is that when a movie was coming out, let's say Shrek, for example, we would see the trailer for Shrek. I would go and see if there's a book for it. And of course, Shrek was first a book before it was a movie. We would go get Shrek the book and read it so that when we saw the movie, we could compare that. We did that with Spider-Man and superhero movies. We even did that with The Wizard of Oz when it came out. It used to come out once a year. Now it seems to
Yeah.
come out every. But when we knew the Wizard of Oz was coming, we would go and we would read beforehand the Wizard of Oz, and then we could compare. And that way, kids are intrigued now. You've got like a little thing just between the two of you to and that they'll probably carry over with their children. They will go, and when a movie comes out, go get the book first so that they can read it. So you know reading to me, is the most amazing form of entertainment. It's probably the oldest form of entertainment, and for a reason. I mean, you can't anymore go to a record store to get a record. You can no longer really go to a blockbuster to buy a movie. The only way you really get books is you have to kind of go to a bookstore, even if it's a virtual bookstore, and buy it. And so, like that in itself says there's something really powerful. Stephen King, I'm referencing again, called books portable pieces of magic.
Oh,
And I
wow.
think more so than any other form of entertainment, that's exactly what books are. They're these little pieces of the author's soul instilled inside of these pages, and to be able to share that with your child's soul is something that I think is just incredibly important. So respect the power of books, and introduce yourself, and more importantly, introduce your children to the wonderful world of books. And you can really do that simply just by walking into a bookstore.
I love that. And I love that you gave some tips for parents. And in addition to the tips you just shared, you also created some very specific items to serve as complements to your books. You created learner guides or teacher guides. Can you tell us
Yes.
a little bit about those?
So when I started visiting schools, the schools, and they would get the books and they would use them as a read aloud, which I appreciated. I loved that my teachers would read the books aloud. But to really get the teachers bought in, and this was more of a strategic idea, I built Common Core educator guides, and create the curriculum in that Common Core structure So now it was more than just read aloud. This is actually something that the teacher can build into their curriculum to help them learn about, like, for example, you said I put science into the book. Well, this educator guide actually helps encourage learning more about science. So the book no longer is just a read aloud. It's actually a tool that educators are using to help empower their kids. So that was really, and I got that idea honestly from another author. I went to an author was coming to a school and I wanted to sit in, and she had an educator guide. And I said, my gosh, that's ingenious. So, I think it was Picasso who once said that good artists borrow and great artists steal. And so I stole this idea from this author, and because of that, thousands of educators around the country have used these educator guides as tools to empower their kids about the power of my books and reading.
I don't call it stealing, I call it benchmarking.
Ooh, that's even better.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Authored by Us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review so you never miss an episode. Now back to the show with your host, Zenzi Hodge.
So we're back with Ty Allan Jackson talking about his book, The Supadupa Kid. Ty, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because in addition to being an author, you are also a public speaker. And I sat and I watched your TEDx talk. I really enjoyed it. And this was your talk titled Read or Else. And I was mesmerized by some of the statistics that you shared. And the program you created, you also gave a call to action to the audience all during this one talk. So can you share with us a little bit about the items you covered in your TEDx?
Sure. Well, I want to first say I actually did 3 TEDx's, but and that was my second one entitled Read or Else, which is the byproduct of a program that my brother and I co-founded called the FULL program, which stands for Families United Through the Love of Literacy, in which we would visit a correctional facility and we would talk to parents about the power and the importance of reading and how they can still be relevant in their child's life despite being incarcerated. And they could do so because we would give them one of my other books, which is titled When I Close My Eyes, which is a picture book. And we would record them and reading it aloud and put that recording onto a DVD so that then they could put that DVD into their DVD player, which are probably a little obsolete now, but this was a few years ago, and have their mom or dad reading them a story. And then we would send them a copy of that same book so that they could read it together. And what was beautiful about that program is that where I live in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the recidivism rate is 47%. So basically 50%, almost 50% of all inmates get out, go back. Mm-hmm. Within the 600 participants we did within the full program, our recidivism rate was at 8%. Wow. 8. And so, like, making the connection and the bond between, the importance, and not just the importance of reading, but the bond between parent and child, and making that connection really paramount and relative. Because the one thing that 100% of the inmates said within the program is that they never want this to happen to their children. So, and then making the connections between illiteracy and incarceration, illiteracy and dropping out, teen drug use, unemployment, being on welfare. All of these things are directly, not indirectly, but directly connected to illiteracy. One of the statistics that really blew me away is that 2 out of 3 kids who can't read by the 4th grade will end up incarcerated or on welfare. 2 out of 3. And that's devastating. So there's nothing more proactive that we can do for the welfare of our children than empower them about the importance of reading. So anyway, Read or Else stands for being able, we have the logo, we put it on a t-shirt, and with every t-shirt or hoodie that we sell, we send a book to a child in a Title I school or in a homeless shelter. So that way we're encouraging the power and the importance of reading for really those who need it the most. So we've been going on with that program for about 6-7 years now. And we've sold thousands and thousands of shirts and hoodies and stuff like that. And it's been incredibly impactful.
And what you're showing is that reading is not just about entertainment or about education, but reading can also save your life. So
reading can save your life, 100%.
Now, tell us where we can find not just the Supadupa Kid 1 and 2, but all of your books.
You can find all five, soon to be six, of my books, including all of my Reader Else gear at tyallanjackson.com. That's TYALLAN Jackson.com. But you can also find my books on Amazon. A lot of authors would prefer that they not get their books from Amazon. I have a very loving and healthy relationship with Amazon. So if that's the place that you feel more comfortable purchasing, go for it. I will say that I cannot sign books via Amazon. So if you want a signed copy of the book, you would have to go to tyallanjackson.com for that.
Wonderful. Now, because we're still dealing with the effects of this pandemic, it's changed a lot for how authors engage and how they engage with their audiences. So what are some of the ways that you're staying connected with your readers right now?
So when my book, The Supadupa Kid, came out during the summertime, and this was like, dead center of the pandemic, it was really important with kids being isolated in their homes to find different forms of entertainment. So I would read, all of my books aloud, and kids would tune in every day at noon. And I would, after my books were done, I would read the books of other authors because it was just important. I mean, I was home, they were home. We had technology where we can communicate. It just made sense for us to utilize it in some capacity. And while it really filled my soul to be able to engage with these kids, because that's primarily what I do, I go out and visit schools. Well, with schools closed, I can't do that. So, this was the next best thing to be able to do safely. So, but it also really helped stimulate my business. Because I was really relevant on social media all the time and kids were, getting my books read to them, I end up selling a record amount of books. In fact, I sold more books just throughout the spring and summer months than I did all of the previous year. So it really worked. And that wasn't even my objective. It was really just to be able to engage with kids and maintain a connection with them while we were all under quarantine. So that was just, so now that's kind of spun off into me doing a noontime chat, which I do every single day. And I do it initially just because I am unbelievably extroverted, and being in isolation myself and living alone, I need attention. And so, so I build these relationships. It's now really with adults because kids are still in school at noontime. So I don't get the children audience. So we're talking about, like I talk a lot about life lessons. I talk about being an independent author who sold over 100,000 copies of his books, and how other authors can do the same. We'll talk about parenting. We'll talk about whatever the topic is of the day, and it allows me to kind of get that social fix that I crave so badly because of this isolation. Not to mention, I'm pretty relevant on pretty much every social media platform you can imagine, including TikTok, much to my daughter's chagrin. So yeah, I'm not hard to find. Google Ty Allan Jackson is more than a dozen ways to be able to stay in touch with me.
And we'll be sure to put links to all of your social platforms in our podcast notes. And I'm going to have my son friend you on TikTok. He'll accept a friend request from you, probably just not from me. So we'll work on that.
We'll work on that.
So since you spend so much time interacting with young readers through your books, through the work that you do as a public speaker, what do you think inspires the next generation of writers?
Wow, that's a really magnificent question. We are in such racial unrest and so divided, not even just as a nation, but really just as a world, that the news and the media has been so relevant into our lives that I'm thinking that perhaps that finding new ways to communicate via spoken word, via prose and text, and writing books or blogs and stories. But and I hope I don't sound wrong in saying this, I hope that's not the case. I really believe our children need to read for fun. They need to read for stimulation. They need to read for joy. Reading is just the most amazing joy there is. I talked about movies before. Well, whenever someone reads a book that they've seen and then see the movie, the book's always better, and it's better for a reason. And so I want kids to find that. I want them to find the love and the spark and the joy and the pleasure and the passion that comes with writing, that comes with reading. So while the world has made us a little bit more callous and has separated us more, and perhaps that inspires the next, New York Times writer, and I hope it does. But I also hope that it spawns, the next, Tasha Honey Coates, or that it spawns the next Walter Mosley or Ty Allen Jackson.
I was about to say that.
So I think that's really important, and that's why it's also important for me to be really relevant on social media, because I want kids, especially Black kids and kids of color, to be able to see that being a children's book author is actually a possibility. That's in the landscape of what I could become. And when kids read my books, and especially so many of them that tell me that the Supadupa Kid was that book that turned them into a reader, well, I'm also assuming that might be the book that turns them into a writer, that allows them to be the next Ty Allen Jackson, and to blaze a trail and a path to create more children's books featuring Black kids and children of color. And so yeah, I'm hoping that's the case.
Wow. Well, we know your books have had impact on children or others. So tell us, what was the children's book that had the biggest impact on you when you were growing up?
It's funny. I get that question all the time, and I don't really have an answer. I don't remember the children's book that really inspired me and motivated me. What it really was, and I emphasized it before, was comic books. Comic books really, they made up like 98% of my reading. And like, I gravitated to superheroes really, really early, probably, 4, 5, 6 years old. I had, little Batman and Superman action figures. And then once I got comic books and I learned how to read, that kind of took up all my energy. And I kind of went straight from comic books to novels. Like I remember reading Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, Richard Wright's Native Son, Malcolm X, the autobiography, Alex Haley's The Autobiography of Malcolm X. I read all of those at about 10, 11 years old. So I kind of skipped the children's books generation. I went from comic books to real books, and it helped cement me into the writer and reader that I am today.
Wow, that's actually amazing. There's so much that you've done, and I know there's so much more that you plan on doing. So tell us, what's the next big project for Ty Allen Jackson?
Well, the next big project actually happens in about 14 hours. As I'm saying to myself out loud, and you've done a masterful job of this interview, kind of bringing to light all of my work, from my TED Talks to Reader Else, and the full program, in addition to just touring the country and talking to children about the power of reading. I see that I'm really proud of my body of work, and especially in such a short period of time. It's only been 10 years since my book debuted for the first time. And apparently that this has gotten some notoriety and some recognition, because the local college in my community, MCLA, which USA News and Reports dubbed as the number 3 most prestigious college in the country, tomorrow morning is giving me an honorary doctorate.
Wow.
And and I, it's a dream that I didn't even conceive. When I became an author and I realized this is what I wanted to do with my life, I foresaw it becoming a play. I foresaw it coming a movie. I foresaw it coming a series and action figures and all these other things. I didn't foresee myself being honored with a doctrine. I couldn't even dream that big. And so, and this is coming from a kid who's never went to college, who grew up in the hood from a single parent, and who, despite having sold over 100,000 copies of my books, I probably have my books in maybe only 10 bookstores across the country. So I found really unconventional ways, like Reader Else and the full program, to stay relevant in the world of literature and literacy. And apparently it got noticed. And just last week, MCLA, which is the university, reached out to me and asked me to give their commencement speech, which I'm doing tomorrow. And when I give that speech, they will honor me with a doctorate.
Wow. So the next time I speak with you, I get to call you Dr. Ty Allan Jackson.
That is 100% correct.
All right. Congratulations. And thank you for sharing that with us on this episode.
Thank you. I've never said this publicly before, so I'm honored to be able to say this directly to you for the first time.
Wow. And I'm honored that you shared that with us. Thank you so much. Ty, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you. From your love of books, your love of reading, your love of comics, the energy that you brought to the pages of the Supadupa Kid. And I can't wait to read Supadupa Kid 2 and your other books. But you brought so much energy to these pages. And thank you for sharing that with us in your book and on today's episode. So thank you for being here with us.
You are a wonderful interview, and I thank you for the platform to showcase not just myself, but so many authors who need a voice to be able to express the amazing gift that they have of creating literature. So I thank and I bow to you for your service.
Thank you. As we get ready to close the cover on this bookshelf gem, I would like to thank our author, Ty Allan Jackson, for spending the time with us today to talk about his book, The Supadupa Kid. I would also like to thank you, our listeners, for joining us this week for this episode of Authored by Us. We invite you to join us next week as we introduce a new author talking about their book. Until next time, happy reading.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Authored by Us. Every author has a story to tell, and we enjoy bringing their stories to you each week. Whether you are listening as a young reader or are sharing this podcast with the young readers in your life, we are delighted to celebrate these stories inspired by diversity and shared in the voice of their authors. Follow us on social media at Authored by Us and subscribe to our podcast using your favorite podcast app. That way you never miss an episode. Have a gem on your bookshelf that we should have on ours? Visit us online at authoredbyus.com and let us know. Until next time, happy reading.